We have probably seen or read of this several times before. And we talk about David and Goliath and the battle that is being fought here in 1 Samuel. Too much code red? Is there? Seems to be a problem somewhere. I'll try not to move, we'll see. When we look at David and Goliath, we see Goliath and all his armor, and we're familiar with this story, and what the meaning should be for this story is the fact that we as God's people seem to be overwhelmed by the world around us. Now we talk about having faith. We see Goliath here with all his armor, and he's ready to kill whoever as this big giant, and the reaction of Israel is what? They're scared, they're afraid. Okay? They're not going to attempt to fight this giant because you can't defeat this giant. Okay? And there are times, I think, that we look in the story of the Bible, we look at the church, and we have the same attitude that there are these things that we're never going to be able to conquer, so why try? And this is where the disconnect happens here. That here's Saul, here's Israel, and they are standing there afraid, shaking in their boots of this giant that they have been faced with now. Yet, if we would ask them if they were the people of God, their answer would be yes. If we were to ask them if they had faith, their answer would be yes. But here comes David. Anybody know how old David is? About 17. Okay? If you notice the beginning of the video that Samuel anoints David as king of Israel when Saul dies. And I don't know if you know the story there, but that David is so insignificant in the story that Jesse doesn't even have him at the house for Samuel to pick from. And Samuel is going to anoint one of Jesse's sons as king, and God keeps telling Samuel, no, not him, and he goes through all the sons. And Samuel says to Jesse, don't you have any more sons? And he says, what? Oh yeah, we got one out there, he's a 17-year-old boy. He's out there watching the sheep, didn't even have him come in and eat with us. And he becomes the king of Israel. So in the midst of this, Jesse sends David down to his brothers to see what's going on in the battle they're having. And then David shows up here, and the rest of the story is history. But with all their weapons, everything they had, David approaches with these 5 stones and a slingshot. Now, that doesn't make much sense, does it? Okay? The question is, who won? Who was the victor? Okay. And see, the people of God. And God is the victor. And I think it's very important that we see here in David's life that his life is our life. His struggle is our struggle that we go through. I would suppose if we were to sit here for a while and talk, every one of us has a giant in front of us. Whatever it might be. Maybe it's an illness. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe you're losing your home, or maybe your marriage is disintegrating, whatever the case may be. But we have these big things before us, and for some reason, we've decided that we don't want to fight that fight. That we don't, because why? We don't think we can win. And God looks down at us and says, no, you can't win. But I can. I can. David's motive in doing this is that Goliath was making fun of God. That was, one of the things he says in the text here that I think is so important. He says to Goliath that everyone will know that there's a God in Israel. David had nothing to prove here. He had nothing to lose here and everything to gain. This giant was making fun of God. And that we have those giants in front of us that are mocking God. But we, even though we have decided not to fight the fight, if we were asked, are we people of faith? Our answer would be, well, yes. We're not doing anything, but we're people of faith. Are you the people of God? We would say, well, yes, we're not obeying God, but we are the people of God. We really don't have much faith in God. I was up this morning and I got this email with a bunch of pictures. I'll have to show them to you eventually. But this one that I had to show you this morning because I think it illustrates the disconnect that we have as far as faith is concerned. Now, if you can't read that, it says, ball making shop, we can repair anything. Please knock hard on the door, the bell doesn't work. We would call ourselves people of God, but there's a disconnect somewhere. I think it's very interesting that we have decided to define faith. We have decided to set the standard of salvation. And that's the disconnect, that we as a church, as Christians, stand and talk about our belief in God, but there's that disconnect though. We're going to knock on the door because the bell doesn't work. That we are not expressing that. You know, people will say to me, well, Joe, we need a new revelation from God. No, we just need people to obey the old one. That's what we need. We need the church to stop and reconsider who we are and what we're going through. And it's our faith that maybe is in need of repair. Maybe there's lessons that we can learn from David here. I'm sure there are. As we go through what David goes through here, that we can learn what faith really is, what God determines faith really is. So the first thing we're going to look at is, and what we can identify with David, is that life is a life of opposition and obstacles. Is it not? It just seems like constantly, doesn't it? That there's something here that we're having to struggle with. There's something over here, and we never quite find our way. And there's so many people struggle with so much. Can you give me some examples of things that people are struggling with? Maybe you don't have to give personal, but things that you know of that people are struggling with.
Jobs.
Pardon me?
Health.
Health. Okay. That is a struggle, isn't it? That is a giant that's in front of us. If not right now, it's going to be, isn't it? It's going to be. Okay. What else?
Having a job.
What?
Having a job.
Having a job. You know, Bob's going to Georgia to find a job. Having a job. You know, you watch the news, they keep telling you that things are improving. The job market is improving, and I keep thinking, well, not in Watsika, Illinois, it's not. Not in this area, it's not. And then when you start looking into that, you know, there are those people that I know of that are moving because they cannot find a job. The family is not going to be able to continue. This has been a couple years ago, at least, maybe more than that. I was up in Chicago, and there was this lady that was on the street that was pushing the shopping cart, you know, the stereotype that we have, and had occasion to stop and just talk to her for a few moments. Her and her husband and 2 children were very successful in Chicago. They had good jobs, but his company closed down. Okay? They all live on the street now, but not in the same place because they cannot survive all 4 of them together. So her husband is on the street somewhere. Her 2 children, who are teenagers, are on the street somewhere. And she doesn't know where they're at. She hardly ever gets to see them because they're in different parts of the city. Now here's a family. They had the apartment, they had the job, they had everything, and just everything fell apart. So try to explain to them that finding a job is not some giant, not some big struggle they're in. What else would be a struggle for us? Health, a job, marriage. Okay? That a lot of people are struggling as far as the marriage is concerned.
Raising children.
Pardon me?
Raising children.
Raising children. Okay? That is quite a struggle, is it not? And what we find out, right, Marge, you never are done raising them, are you? Okay? Okay? Anything else?
Work relationships.
Pardon me?
Work relationships.
Work relationships. Okay? Okay? People. We struggle with people, and they struggle with us because we are human. So we have all these things in front of us, all these obstacles that seem to be in the way, and sometimes absolutely being opposed by that. And at times that we see people that are in the midst of unspeakable circumstances. Okay? I won't go into names. There's part of Beverly, and by the way, these flowers are from Beverly Marion's family they wanted to share with us. But there was a particular person, member of her family that I was talking to. And come to find out, they had this little girl named Shelby, and come to find out that they had lost a 2-year-old daughter just 6 years ago. Boy, what a giant. What a circumstance. Unspeakable. I can't imagine what that would be like, but we all know of people who have found themselves in those kinds of situations, and to be able to deal with that has to be excruciating, painful, to try to deal with all the loss and the sorrow that we have. So we At times we think that we're in pretty bad shape, and then we come to find out that we're doing quite well. We're doing quite well. But the world's full of those. You know, people say, well, Joe, the world is full of suffering, and I know that, but I also know the world is full of people overcoming suffering too. And that's what God is all about. One of the things I always share with people is the fact that if we want to be healed, if we want to get our lives back together, we can look a lot of places, but we're never going to find it anywhere outside of God. We need someone who is greater than life, greater than circumstance. That's where David is at. He knows that. He knows the God that he believes in is mightier than this giant that's in front of him. And he trusts in his faith. And I think one of the things that we look at, that maybe we'll talk about in a little bit, is that David, there's one thing David does not do that we do. Is that a word? Do? It is, but not in the context of what I just said. David didn't talk himself out of his faith. We do. Wow, that would be a great thing to do, wouldn't it? But oh, wait a minute. What about this? We don't have the money. We don't have this. We don't have all this. So we start talking ourselves out of that. And what a shame what we could accomplish for God if we didn't talk ourselves out of our faith. Okay? But these obstacles, anybody know what that is? And no, it is not a portrait of me. It's a loggerhead turtle. You ever heard of them before? These are those huge ones. Robin has heard of them before, but Robin knows everything. So, there was a lady that's done quite a bit of work with her. Her name is Barbara Taylor. And these turtles live in the water. In fact, they will die outside of the water. And she found this one on the dunes here, long ways from the ocean. And it's really struggling, and she knows that if something doesn't happen, this thing is going to die. So she gets a hold of a ranger that patrols that area, and he comes with his Jeep. He takes out his tire chains. He wraps those chains around, well, he flips the turtle over his back, wraps these chains around this turtle, hooks it to his Jeep, and takes off, dragging this for a couple of miles, dragging this turtle all the way back to the ocean. What the turtle, as difficult as what the turtle is going through, what the turtle doesn't realize is that without this, it's going to die. And there are times that God takes us on this journey to pass these obstacles, past all the difficulties, and sometimes we don't know whether He's saving us or killing us. We don't know whether He is helping us or destroying us from what we go through in these situations. I cannot believe that David just nonchalantly walked out there to kill this giant. You don't think he wasn't afraid? This giant is about 9 feet tall. This giant's got all of these weapons and all this strength that he has to fight with. And sometimes we see around us that we just can't fight this battle at all. There's a difference. I think it's important for us to understand there's a difference between confronting and dealing with this giant and allowing the giant to control us. There's a big difference between the two. Now, my question is, what is the biggest giant that we face? It's common to all of us. The biggest giant that we fight and we deal with is our sin. We don't seem to be able, well, most of our society is not even trying to fight it anymore. We're just accepting that it's okay to do, and there is no struggle that they're going through. And that's this big giant that we have here. And there's a difference between fighting the battle against this giant and just letting the giant control us. Just let him have his way with us as we try to get through this. The normal reaction that I see with people, as far as these giants are concerned, is they become discouraged and just give up. That they fight the battle, and sometimes the battle goes on for a long time, but we finally decide we're just going to give in to it and just let this giant remain. What is the idea of the sermon? It's a journey from what? Slavery to freedom. Giants are not going to go away on their own. They don't. We can hope they do, but they don't. And the only way that you're going to defeat a giant is to stand up and fight the giant. But we're not fighting him on our own. We are not standing here by ourselves, by our own devices. We try that, don't we? And that's when we fail. That's when we lose the battle, when we try on our own power. Notice that when they give David the shield, and the Bible says that Saul even put his armor on David. What did David do with it? Threw it off. That's not the weapons he's going to fight with. See? So sometimes we can't defeat these giants because we're not using the right tactic to fight against them. That is our faith. That is what's going to see us through, and not just faith, but our faith in Jesus. These obstacles that we encounter, these struggles that we have in life are real. They are very real, and we're not going to be able just to pretend that they're going to go away. They are powerful. They intimidate us, just as Goliath did to the Israelite army. See, that's the way with giants. You never expect them. You're never really ready for them. But then you find yourself in the midst of the battle with them. And so many times when we fight the battle, we can't see beyond ourselves. We think it's just this small little battle we're by ourselves, and that's exactly what Satan wants us to think, that we have been isolated. We focus on the obstacles. Okay? I mean, is it not true with a lot of people? If you come up with a remedy for a situation, one of the first things that people will talk about is why it won't work. That's just right off the bat. That we look at these obstacles, we view everything in the view of this obstacle. Instead of looking at God, we look at the obstacle. And that's where our problem begins. That if we focus upon the obstacles, we're going to stumble. But if we focus upon God, then we're going to see the giants start to fall to the wayside. The problem that is in front of us is, what are we going to do? How are we going to react? How did Saul and the army of Israel react? Over shaking their boots. Oh, wow, he's a giant. There's no way in the world. And right in the middle of this, who steps up? David. Stupid little 17-year-old boy. What does he know? What does he know? Okay? He thinks with this slingshot that he is going to be able to fight this giant and win. And David's response is what? Well, yeah. Yeah, because I'm not going there on my own. That God is with me. And once we understand that, then we're going to see these obstacles differently, because the next thing that we see with David and with us is the fact that life is a bunch of challenges and change. You know, people say, well, I don't like change, but the reality is nothing ever stays the same. Right? Okay? I mean, Pete Brady is better looking today than he was yesterday. Right, Ryan? You want lunch today, don't you? Yeah. Okay. But no, people say, I like, nothing's the same. Nothing's the same. It is constantly changing. And that is what life is. And life is full of this change, but it's also a life of challenges. That it seems like every time you turn around, there is something in front of us that is challenging us to respond the way that we're supposed to respond. The Israelite army would consider themselves people of faith, would they not? Saul was the king. He would consider himself a person of faith. So their response to the challenge before them, where is Saul at? Where is the army of Israel at? Where is David at in the midst of this challenge? See, there are times when we are challenged that we remain right where we're at. We decide not to answer that challenge, but to consider that I'm not a Christian anymore. We're not even going to go there. I'm not showing faith. I'm not going to obey God. I'm not going to meet the challenge that God has put before me. Who puts Goliath out in front of the army of Israel? The Philistines, or was it God that put him there? Okay. I choose to believe that it was God. That it was time for the Israelite army to face the challenge. How many days had Goliath come out to challenge them? Do you remember? 40 days. Morning and night. So when do we answer him? 40 days. And there is no response whatsoever. You see, I believe that God is challenging us as Christians, that He challenges us as a church. And that challenge is before us, and how are we going to answer that? Are we just going to let the challenge remain? See, that's where the world is struggling. I told you many times before, the world is crying out for something, and the church is stuttering. It's mumbling. There is no response from the church because we're not sure. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. Goliath is David's opportunity. When we find an obstacle in front of us, if you look real close, you're going to find an opportunity. That we have a tendency to look negatively at things. Oh my goodness, look what happened. But God has opened the door. It's an opportunity. And this is David's opportunity to show Israel, to show the Philistines, to show himself about God's presence, about God's power. Here is his opportunity for him to grow in his faith. And that's what I see in front of us personally, what I see in front of us as a church. Here's an opportunity that we can see and show whether we have faith or not. That we're ready to meet the challenge that the world has before us. And people will say, well, do you look at the way the world is? What in the world can we do as far as society is concerned? I remember it would be on next Sunday on the radio program, because I do those a week in advance, about a newspaper article that talked about the immorality and the violence and all these things going on in the world, and that over half of the young ladies are having babies out of wedlock, and everything that's going, and how the corruption in society and in politics and all that. And you read that and you thought, man, that could fit in right today. You know when it was written? 1564. Right before John Wesley began to preach a great revival called the Great Awakening. So it's all the same. The challenge is there. The challenge isn't going to change. The key is how we're going to respond to it or not. And I can tell you that the world looks at us, and I'm talking about the church in general in many ways, saying they really don't believe what they say they believe. They would be doing something if they did. You know, I think I've shared that with you before about this high school youth group in this particular town. It was right before Easter, and they were going around each house and leaving some information about the resurrection, about the church. And there was this one particular home that they were standing in front of because they knew it was an elderly Jewish man. And that he would have nothing to do with Christ. He would have nothing to do with Christianity. And they wondered whether they should even go or not. Okay? So they decided to go. They thought they would hit every house. So they knocked on the door. The man was very respectful. And as they stood there and shared with him about Jesus, when they got done, this gentleman looked at those kids and said, if 10% of what you just told me is true, you should be 100 times more excited than you are. That even he understood what was involved in this message of Christ and the hope that it gives to the world. So how are we going to react to that? See, what we would call, well, to yourself, just think for a moment. What would you have thought if you're standing there and David's on his way out to meet Goliath? How would you describe David? Not me, Marge, but David. What was it? Stupid. Isn't it interesting that what we would call stupid, God calls faith? What we would say is absurd, God says faith. See, honestly, and I know it's true with most of you, but I think that the world ought to watch us every week and think there's something stupid about us. Seriously. That they should look at us and say, what's wrong with those people? Look at the way that they live. Andrew Carnegie, I don't know if you remember that name or not. I believe that is the quote here that I have for you. I quit listening to what men say, I just watch what they do. Because I will live based upon what I really believe. Say what you want, that's what we do. And this is the man that did all of those personal seminars about influencing people and everything. And he finally gets to the point where he said, I'm not even going to listen to what you say. I'm just going to watch what you do. Because that will tell me who you really are. And it's true of the church. It was true of David. It's a life of conflict and confrontation. That's just the world in which we live. There's times that life is a great battle just for survival. Just to continue to be able to live. It's a struggle. Have you been watching the news about the Christian preacher in Iran? He's in prison, 8.5 years now? And they don't know what's going to happen with him. Why is he in prison? Why? He's being beaten, tortured, everything. Why? One reason only. He's a Christian. He was attempting to get some of the Christian churches together. Okay? Talk about conflict. Talk about confrontation. See, we don't catch this on the news because the news isn't telling us all these things. In Egypt, they are trying to cleanse Egypt of Christians. 10% of the population, their life is in jeopardy right now because they're going to be killed because they believe in Jesus. And they don't want them. It's illegal in Iran to be a Christian. It's illegal in Egypt to be a Christian under the current government right now. Talk about confrontation. And then when someone makes fun of us, we turn tail and run. We're afraid to say anything because somebody might make fun of us. Well, there are those who are struggling for their survival. And there's times I know that in life we become tired. We're unwilling to continue to fight the battle. And because we're doing this on our own. We have to face the challenge. If not, it's going to enslave us. It's going to paralyze us. It's going to keep us exactly where we've always been. And the battle never gets fought. Faith is determined by my response to my battles. My faith is gauged by my determination of whether to fight and how I respond. Goliath's challenge, it says they were dismayed and terrified when he speaks to the Israelite army. I thought they were God's people. I remember the book of Acts when Paul and his crew came to a particular town. The response was, those who have turned the world upside down are here. They were scared to death. The church had come to their town. How many people in Watsika today are afraid of us because we're meeting? They're afraid of us because of our presence in our community. That's the confrontation that is there. Anybody know who this guy is or was? Who said Christian? Boy, you're showing your age, Bob.
He beat his shoe on him.
Yeah, he did a lot of things. There was a particular time he was speaking. And one of the people that he dealt with in Russia was a man named Joseph Stalin, who was an absolute monster in some of the things that he did. And Khrushchev was talking about some of the things that Stalin did that he disagreed with and disparaging Stalin in a very real way. And somebody in the crowd said, well, why didn't you say something? And Khrushchev looked around and said, who said that? And he was completely silent. And then he said, now you know why. The same reason we don't speak is because of fear. Of what? Of what? These are confrontations here. They are here for the idea of us being able to promote our faith. What would possess David to go out there and try to fight this giant? Faith. His faith in God. And that is what God is calling us to step out to fight the giants that are in our lives, that are in our community. There is no logical reason for David to be the one to fight Goliath. However, he won. God gave him the victory, and God, if we will step out in our faith, God will give us the victory also. We talk all we want to, folks, but there comes a time that it's obvious whether we have faith or not by the action, by our obedience, by our response. That when we allow the challenges to go unanswered, and we still call ourselves people of faith. You ever seen the commercial? I think it's a company called Regis that has these office setups and things that you can rent, and they'll place them where they even put the workers in. I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not. But one of the lines in their commercial is doubt and fear keeping you from moving forward. Now, they're talking about that in the business life. They're talking about in our spiritual life. Our doubt and fear keeping us from moving forward, holding us back. It's also a life of faith and fortune. Notice, God blesses David after he fights the battle with Goliath. After he is obeyed. That God is going to bless us in great ways if we will step out and fight the battle. If we will remain faithful to him and allow God to work. There was a man named John DeSango that his little girl came in and asked if he would build her a dollhouse. And he said, yes, I will. And he was reading a book, so he went back to reading the book, and he looked out the window and he saw all this stuff out in the yard. And he asked his wife, what's that? That's all of your little girl's stuff. She's taking it out there now because she knows you're going to build the dollhouse for her. That's faith. And of course he jumped up and ran right out and got the lumber to build it. That she knew that he had promised. How sure are we of God's promises? How certain are we that the God we believe in is greater than anything the world can throw at us? There's a man named Vance Hovner. He has written many, many times, and I have two quotes that he has here for us this morning. Too many of us today are shaky about what we believe, but not shaken by what we believe. And the second one, the church suffers today from Christians who know volumes more than they practice. Have all this knowledge, but where is the obedience that we must have? So I guess when we come down to it, I ask the question, when did we decide we would define faith? When did we decide that we would define the terms of salvation? I am not going to go to heaven because I've been a member of Centennial Christian Church for 50 years. I'm going to go to heaven because I have shown faith in God, and I've stepped out to obey God. I've stepped out to serve God, to accomplish His will in my life. Shouldn't we let God define what faith is? Should we not look into our Bibles and let Him tell us what faith is instead of trying to do this on our own? Could it be that what we call faith is not faith at all? It's mental assent. I agree with certain facts and I say I have faith. No. No. Faith is when I act upon those promises of God. When I look at the facts. You know, to me, faith is simply obeying the Word of God, doing what God has told me to do. And I believe each one of us has this moment of truth where I have to decide whether I believe or not and quit faking it. You know, one of the greatest things I can do in my Christian faith is to look to God and say, God, I'm faking it. I know I'm supposed to believe. I know I'm even a big shot in the church, but I don't. I don't. And let God decide, and let God work in my life to change where I'm at as far as my life is concerned. David was a man of faith. He believed in God. He trusted in God. He stepped out and he obeyed God. It didn't matter what God told him to do. If you watched the show last Sunday night, one of the big things that I really enjoyed was Moses parting the Red Sea. And that was fantastic. You know, he threw his staff and hit it on the ground and everything. Man of faith. That would have never happened if Moses would have stood out and said, no, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And so many times that we seem to do that. Promise. Unless I can put my finger in the nail press, put my hand aside, I'm not going to believe. And what's the end of that story? Jesus came and paraphrased, do it. Okay? But what he says to Thomas is this, Thomas, you've got to come to the point where you either believe or you don't. We can't keep playing games with this. And he used a play of words, either faith or no faith, because there is no place in between. And Thomas then accepts that fact of his faith in Christ. And he begins then to live that genuine life that we look for. Hebrews chapter 11:1. God blessed David after his demonstration of faith, after his obedience that he has given him. Faith knows that regardless of the size or the strength of the giant, that God can give us the victory, period. Faith knows that. We don't think it, we know it. We are certain, we are sure that the promises of God are true, and therefore we act. Someone asked a young man in Sunday school, do you believe in a big God or a small God? And he said, both. I believe in the big God that the universe cannot hold, but I also believe in the small God that can live within my heart. Faith knows that. Faith is aware of who God is. David, he faced a choice. Does he run away in fear, or does he face it? I have that same choice. Do I run to the battle, or do I run away from the battle? We can live a life that is enslaved by the world, or we can be freed by our faith in God. And that freedom comes only because of our faith in God. It comes nowhere else at all. That the only true freedom that ever exists is when I submit to God. I think of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. And I see this, I can tell you this about David, Abraham, all the way through. This is one characteristic, one trait that I've noticed about all these people of faith in the Bible, that as soon as the battle was settled in their heart, the battle that was in front of them became easy. Once this problem was solved in Abraham's heart, he offered Isaac, did he not? Once this battle, the idea was settled in Joshua's heart, it was easy to fight Jericho because he was sure. His faith was there. The same thing is true of David, that once he knew God was with him, the battle itself became very simple once the storm and the battle in his heart was removed. On sailing ships, the different ship has different colors. It identifies, I don't know how any of you have that knowledge about the different colored flags and what it represents as far as the ship is concerned. Okay? So here we have all these colors and every one of those flags means something that is up there on that mast. But you know what the practice was many times is the fact that if you were sailing, whatever size ship it might have been, and you saw another ship that might be a threat to you, they would take their colors down so they wouldn't be put in danger. So the other ship wouldn't know who they were, that they might want to attack them or whatever. And it was back 1954. How many of you remember 1954? I was 3, so I don't. Billy Graham. You ever watch those old Billy Graham sermons that he preaches? It was back in 1954 that he preached a sermon about nailing our collars to the mast. That as a Christian, if I'm a Christian, I need to put that up on the mast and nail it. I can't take it down. I can't find myself in a position that I'm threatened, therefore I'm not going to let anybody know that I'm a Christian because I don't want to be put in that kind of spot. He said, nail your collars to the mast. You can't take it down. They're up there. Everybody's to know who you are, and you can't take it down. David was a great hero at 17. He looked at what was before him and understood all the struggles that were there, but with God's presence and God's power, David met the battle and becomes perhaps the greatest king of Israel in the years to come. If we will accept that fact, that he is with us, his presence is with us, his power is there. He has funneled, Romans 1. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It is the power of God. He's with us. If we will accept that, then we too can fight the giants and find ourselves victorious because the battle, as David said, is the Lord's. And we are being used by him to accomplish his will. Our hymn of invitation and dedication this morning is number 577, Abide With Me. That should be the beginning prayer, I guess, of all Christians, that Christ is with us. He is with us. And that through him we can beat the giant and we can defeat that giant, and only with him. Let's stand together. We're going to sing the first and third verse.